Mohamed El-Erian joining us from Pacific Investment Management Company. Mohamed, good noon to you.
Good afternoon, Tom.
You wrote today, the movement has endured tremendous pain and taken enormous risks. Let their brave historic efforts be reinforced by properly resetting an economy that has been subjected to a dramatic sudden stop. What would you like to see Egypt be in 30 days?
You know, Tom, everybody right now is rightly focusing on the political issues, and things are moving very quickly, and it is correct to do so. But we should not forget that there's also an economic and financial aspects, that over the next 30 days, especially if change occurs, the Egyptian economy has to restart, has to recover, and has to get back on the path of rapid growth. So the reason why I wrote that, Tom, is to make the point that we should not be simply obsessed with the politics. We should also be thinking about what it takes to restart an economy that has been dramatically stopped in its track by the events of the last few weeks.
We see what clearly is celebration on the footage live from Cairo, folks. And Mohamed, the headlines coming fast and furious here. Would you like to see the vice president take over, I'm going to call a negotiated democracy, or do you have a different vision over what the leadership would be? I think of, say something, and Mohamed, I think of this as simple as my childhood, the cacophony of that scene of the Arab League in Lawrence of Arabia. We don't want that. What do we want to see in modern Egypt?
Tom, we want to see a transition process that has the buy-in of the majority of Egyptians. That transition process is going to have to deliver three things. One, a timetable for parliamentary elections that are fair and free. Secondly, constitutional reform. Third, presidential elections. So what's critical over the next few days is to deliver a transition process that is credible for most Egyptians.
Can the vice president lead that process with his military background?
He could. I think the one credible institution in Egypt is the army. The army can define the parameters of this transition as long as it's viewed as a means to another end, which is greater democracy and greater freedom. There is still concern out there that it could be not a means to an end, but an end in itself. I don't think that's the case, but there's understandable concern out there.
Mohamed El-Erian, when you look at this, and within your heritage, your father is a diplomat of Egypt, what is the administration in Egypt hearing now from the elite of Egypt? Have the elite shifted to the protesters? In all of your conversations, what's been the dynamic the last few days of the elite of the nation?
Well, my father passed away 30 years ago, so I'm not hooked in as much, but I can tell you that there's many conversations going on right now, and there is a desire to avoid chaos. Everybody is afraid of chaos because there are no winners if the situation becomes chaotic. So everybody is hoping for managed change. There are still different versions of managed change. And the critical thing is to converge on a common understanding of what this managed change looks like.
Mohamed, and just speaking with Juliana Goldman and Peter Cook, let me ask you the question I asked them. What would be the El-Erian prescription for the Obama administration? How should we project assistance from Washington?
First and foremost, to understand that this is a revolution by Egyptians, and Egyptians will determine where it's going. Secondly, to be there to support the transition process towards more democracy and more freedom. And thirdly, to recognize that the Egyptian economy is going to need help in restarting. Everything from central bank swap lines to redirecting aid. It is critical that once the political process is clearer, that we can restart this economy in order to deliver, especially to the poor segments of the population that are at risk right now.
Let's take your knowledge of the Middle East. How should the other, not the homogenous Middle East, but each segment of it, how should they adapt to the new Egypt? Let's start with Saudi Arabia, the more conservative royalty of the Middle East.
You know, Tom, it's not just a question of the Middle East. I think there's a temptation to oversimplify to it's just a regional issue. There are many countries today around the world that are dealing with food inflation, that are dealing with high youth unemployment, that are dealing with income inequality. And in this age of social media, it is not as easy to sustain a society with all that. So I think the message that goes out from Egypt to the rest of the world is that governments have to get ahead of the process and have to worry about the unemployed, have to worry about those whose consumption, half of their consumption goes on food and are facing higher prices.
Here's new footage coming in from Egyptian state TV, folks. This is the president and the vice president speaking. There's President Mubarak and the vice president Suleiman sitting next to the desk, and the conversation continues. Also reports of a conversation between the president and the prime minister as well. Mohamed El-Erian, within the leadership of Egypt and the way you know the leadership of Egypt, what signals will you be looking for in the 3 p.m. Eastern Time statement by the president?
I think clarity as to his plans, first and foremost. Secondly, clarity as to the transition process if he decides to step down. And very quickly offering a process of buy-in for the rest of society. So look for these three things, Tom.
There will be celebration, Mohamed El-Erian. We already see that in the footage here from the square in Cairo. Across Egypt, how unified is the Egyptians' towns and villages and the cities to Cairo? Is it a separation, as I perceive Mexico, or is there a greater interconnectedness between the towns and cities in Egypt?
Somewhat greater than Mexico, Tom, but not a completely unified front. And that's why you've seen the protests concentrated in the cities rather than in the rural areas. The cities tend to lead this process.
Within your research at PIMCO and your team, have you changed your investment strategies here as you see the news flow? I don't mean in the last hour or two, but Mohamed, over the last 2 weeks, have you changed not only investment strategies in Egypt, but in the greater Middle East? Is this an opportunity for you professionally?
Sure. I mean, as we spoke about, Tom, and I was with you last time, the immediate reaction to Egypt was pretty indiscriminate. So there was value created from people making too many parallels, indiscriminate selling, etc. So those opportunities arose, and I think you have to look at the market day by day because the events are fast-moving, still uncertain, and there will be both opportunities and risks in this process.
I love a title, Mohamed El-Erian. The gentleman coming up after you, Keith David Watenpa, Bread from Stones, the Middle East and the Making of Modern Humanitarianism. Is Egypt going to need a lot of aid to move forward, or can they generate it? Is there a self-sustaining economy that can recover quickly?
Over time, it is a self-sustaining recovery that has lots of strength. In the immediate few weeks and months, when they are restarting this economy, there will be need to calm sentiment. The one thing I worry about is a certain amount of capital outflow, especially when the stock market is reopened, which is currently scheduled for next Sunday.
How do you buttress against that capital outflow? Can IMF come in and give advice to staunch that outflow?
The first line of defense is the country's reserves. They are substantial as $36 billion, plus another amount that is with the commercial banks. That's the first line of defense. I would like to see that line supported by swaps lines with central banks. I think other central banks can play a role here. And then thirdly, the redirection of aid that has already been committed. With those three things, Egypt should be able to navigate the next few weeks and months.
Mohamed El-Erian, thank you so much. Pacific Investment Management Company.